Joining me is the Shadow Defence Minister, Andrew Hastie. Andrew Hastie, thanks for your time. You've said today that the government, in its response to this strategic review, the Defence Strategic Review, is cannibalising other capability. What are you most concerned about?
Good to be with you, Kieran. Essentially today, from the government, they've talked a lot about us as a country facing the most challenging strategic circumstances since the Second World War, and the opposition agrees. In fact, it was us who said this 3 years ago in the Defence Strategic Update. And so today we're expecting significant investment in the ADF to make sure that we are fit for the decade ahead. And instead, we don't have a strategy until next year. We've seen no new dollars spent, and in fact what we are actually seeing is cuts and cannibalisation of army capability in particular. Right now, Kieran, in the Australian Army, we have 3 mechanised battle groups. We've got 3 RAR up in Townsville, we've got 6 RAR in Brisbane, and we've got 7 RAR in Adelaide. We're going to drop 2 of those mechanised battle groups and go to 1 because of the cuts in the infantry fighting vehicle program from 450 vehicles to 129. So we're seeing exactly what Peter Dutton and I warned about last month.
When you talk about that reduction in those vehicles, the infantry fighting vehicles, what do you say to the argument made by the former Defence Minister Stephen Smith, former CDF Angus Houston, in their review, that those capabilities aren't what we need, essentially trading those off for more missiles? Aren't more missiles more relevant to protecting this continent?
Well, they're investing in HIMARS trucks, which are essentially rockets that can fire from the back of a truck. And if we were to deploy those forward, say, into the region, into any of the island chain in the South Pacific or the archipelago, they would need to be defended by infantry. The best way to defend those would be to use infantry fighting vehicles with a section of 10 infantry in the back and a 30mm cannon on top. That capability has been reduced from 3 battle groups to 1. And so when they talk about missiles, we also need to talk about how we would deploy them and how we would protect them in a conflict. So the other thing as well, Kieran, at the heart of all this, it's strategic doublespeak to talk up the big challenge that we're facing as a country and then to not add a single new dollar to defence spending. And so we agree in the investment in long-range strike missiles, but we also need to maintain other capabilities as well, particularly after the lessons of the last 20 years, and that is infantry are best in a combined arms environment when they're protected by armour, and we're going to see armour degraded over the next decade with the lack of investment.
So do you believe that the Army will be diminished by the review?
I do think the Army will be diminished by the review, indeed, and that's a great. That's a tragedy because we need a strong Army going forward. I know how hard our Army works. I know how important it is to have an Army that's world-class, and a world-class Army is one that can fight in a combined arms environment. And without infantry fighting vehicles, we go back to a light infantry Army, which is where we went after Vietnam during the 1980s. And when it came time for Timor and Iraq and Afghanistan, we had a lot of hard lessons to learn. And by cutting this program, potentially we lose a lot of that institutional knowledge which has been built up over the last 10 to 15 years overseas.
In terms of recasting the mission for the ADF, do you agree with this, particularly the second and third points that the government made, to deter through denial any adversary that seeks to project power against Australia or our interests through the northern approaches, and thirdly, to protect Australia's economic connection to our region and the world? They're the second and third components. The others more broadly playing our role in the international community. Do you think that those 2 definitions of our ADF mission are the right way to look at it?
Yes, indeed, and that's why we've supported the government through AUKUS. In fact, it was the former coalition government who initiated AUKUS, and so we've supported it from a bipartisan perspective. We really do need those submarines to protect our sea lanes, our lines of trade and communication. It's absolutely critical. And so we need a strike capability. The submarines give us that, the missiles give us that. If we think about our strike capability as a mean right cross, we need a mean right cross. But we also need a left jab, as it were, and that's the land power component. And without infantry fighting vehicles, are deploying into a contested area within the archipelago or the South Pacific in future years will be challenging for our army without that additional armour.
We've only got about a minute left, but I do want to ask you about the recommendation agreed in principle by the government that the ADF be the last call, only in exceptional circumstances in the event of natural disasters and so on. Is that the right approach for the ADF, to only be called upon for things like natural emergencies when there are no other services or support available?
Yes, Kieran, very quickly, I think it's right that we focus the ADF on its core task, and that is to win our wars. We honour the work they've done over the last few years, helping the Australian people through flood, fire and the pandemic, but their core mission is to defend Australia and win our wars, and so they must maintain that focus. There's also the counter-terror focus, where our elite counter-terror units, SAS or 2nd Commando Regiment in Sydney, can be called upon if a terrorist situation overwhelms our state jurisdictions and police force, as we saw with the Lindt Cafe siege. So they have a role to play assisting civil authorities, but their main focus should always be war fighting and defending this country.
Joining me live from Perth, Shadow Defence Minister Andrew Hastie. Thanks.
Thank you, Kieran.
Coming up after